All right, Joel, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Baruch Hashem. Okay, so we'll say thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar. To thank Stephen Teri Czinn for dedicating all of his Shir and Drushos this month in memory of Teri's father, Dr. Harry Kahn, Tzvi Hirsh ben Yosef HaKohen. To thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all of his Shir and Drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Zechariah and Dinah bas Pesach. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Moshe Dovid Chana Artman, for dedicating the Shiurim this week in commemoration of the 23rd yahrzeit of Moshe Dovid and Shmuel's father, Phishel Berel ben Yitzchak Gershon, Zechariah. To thank our week of learning sponsors, the Adar Gartenhaus and the zechus of refuah sheleimah for his father-in-law, Natan ben Rivka. We thank our day of learning sponsors, Yehudah and Bracha Buchwalter, for thank you to Hashem, and the refuah sheleimah for Bracha Dinah Chana Bas Mindel Devora. We hope that she, together with Kol Yisrael, will have a complete and enduring refuah. All of the neshamas have an aliyah in the families in Nechama, and a special Baruch Haba to Sayyid Haken. Baruch Hashem, just back from Eretz Yisrael. Baruch Haba, Sayyid. I'm happy to report everything ran smoothly. Baruch Hashem, right? The coffee, everything went great. I did a great job. Video, everything, Baruch Hashem. Okay. Anyway, we'll say, so let's go right there. So we'll say today's daf is Mem Hey 45. Actually, some really interesting Gemaras today. We are picking up on Mem Dalud Amud Beis 44b. And we are picking up 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines up from the bottom. It goes quickly. It doesn't, but it was good. Amrabaye. Rabbi said, I found the friends of Rav Nassan Bar Ushia who were sitting and discussing the following idea. So the Torah says as follows. The Torah speaking about, again, the Nazir. It says, on the 8th day, remember again, the way we've laid out the process of the Nazir, right? It is concluding at the conclusion of his Ned and Naziros is how day number 7 is hair cutting. Day number 8 is karbanos. The difference we saw in the Mishnah was the machlokas Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon about what happens if he delays hair cutting until day number 8. Rabbi Akiva says it's okay, you can still do karbanos day number 8. Rabbi Tarfon Rabbi Tarfon says you push it to day number 9. Right? What's his logic? His logic is that Nazir and Mitzorah should follow the same model. And just like by Mitzorah, shaving and karbanos don't go on the same day, so by Nazir, shaving and karbanos won't go on the same day as well. Fine. So we'll say, so the pasuk says, by Nazir, on the 8th day, he'll come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he'll bring his karbanos. Shtei Torah, Moshe ben Yona. Fine. So the Gemara says as follows. Okay. When does he come? Right? When does the Kohen come? Bisman shehu taval va'asa harav shemesh. We'll say, when does he come to the entrance of the Beis HaMikdash? Only when he does tevilah, right, immerses in the mikvah and has harav shemesh. In other words, he has to go to the mikvah, then the sun has to set, and the next day he comes. So the Gemara says, I should read that differently. Bisman shu taval va'asa harav shemesh in, lo taval va'asa harav shemesh lo. But I will say, if he did not go to the mikvah and have harav shemesh, he would not be able to come in the proximity of the mikdash. Alma kasavar. So we'll say, what do you see from here? Tvul yom shel zav. Kizav dami, that ultimately, again, the Tvul Yom of a Zav has the same status, ultimately, of Zav himself. So the Gemara says, Amina lahon ana elame'ata gaber Nazir tami dichsiv. They will say, what about by atame Nazir, right, or Nazir tame? So what does it say by Nazir tame? Where it says, El HaKohen, the pasuk that the Gemara is quoting over here, same pasuk, Ve'evio sam El HaKohen al Pesach ol HaMoed, a masei huba. Ultimately, again, when does he come to the Mikdash? Bisman shetaval va'asa harav shemesh. Same idea. When can he come before the Mikdash? Only ultimately, again, where there was tevilah and harav shemesh afterwards. So we'll say top of Memhei. Let's analyze this. So Michti, let's analyze Shar Nikanar Heicha Kaimin. So we'll say, where is Shar Nikanar? So remember again, the Nazir, at the conclusion of his Neder Naziros, ultimately, again, is doing everything opposite Shar Nikanar. I will say, now, what I do want to point out to you is, what we're going to do is, this entire blot, this entire daf today, is all about the concluding sacrifices of the Nazir. So after the end of today's shir, we're going to do in Parak Ches, Halachos Aleph, Beis, and Gimel in the Rambam. That's going to bring this together and paint a very beautiful picture of how the concluding rites of the Nazir occurred and where they took place. Because as you can understand, the Gemara is going to be a little bit back and forth. So let's go through the Gemara first. Where is the Nazir showing up? By Shar Nikanor. Where's Shar Nikanor? Hecha Kaiman. B'Shar Levia. Now we'll say, where's Shar Nikanor? So remember again, Shar Nikanor is one of the entranceways by the Azara, by the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. So we'll say, so what is that called? What is that? That's called Sha'arei Levia. Now we'll say, so again, remember, that's called the Levitic camp. That was being a Levitic camp. So remember again, the Beis HaMikdash is very much modeled after the way we camped. Rashi brings this down, after the way we camped in the desert. How do we camp in the desert? What's in the center? The Aron. We call that Machane Shechina. Machane Shechina. Right? What's around the Aron? Machane Levia. Right? Around Machane Levia, Machane Yisrael. So if you think about it a little bit, the Beis HaMikdash kind of follows that same model. So you have, again, what we'll call the Heichal, which is the primary structure of the Beis HaMikdash. When you walked into it, that's where there was the Shulchan, the Menorah, the Mizbeach HaZav, the Paroches, the curtain, then the Aron. So I'll say that's Machane Shechina. It's Machane Shechina. Outside of that, again, the gateways leading in, ultimately, again, Machane Levia. Right, or really even outside a little bit, right? Courtyard, Machane Yisrael, good. So where was Shar Nikanor? B'Shar Levia, Vatani, where the Rebbe say, Tamei Meis, Motor Likanis from Machane Levia. But 1 second, someone who is Tamei Meis is permitted to enter into Machane Levia. So the Gemara says, not only that, V'lo Tamei Meis Bilvad, Rebbe say, not only is someone who's Tamei Meis permitted to enter into Machane Levia, but what? The Gemara says, Ella Afilu Meis Atzmo. Rebbe say, even the Meis himself is permitted to enter into Machane Levia. Now, that's a very dramatic statement. Now, where do we know that from? Sheleimah, Vayikach Moshe's Atzmos Yosef Imo. The pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu took the remains of Yosef with him. Now, this is when we left Mitzrayim, right? Remember again, as Klal Yisrael was busy collecting the spoils of Egypt, Moshe Rabbeinu goes to retrieve the remains of Yosef. And for 40 years in the desert, Moshe Rabbeinu is in charge of those remains. So my imo, what does it mean Moshe Rabbeinu took it with him? Imo b'mechitzaso, imo b'machane levia. It means to say that he took it with him. Literally again, Moshe kept it with him. Now where did Moshe reside? Moshe was a Levi. Now, now until he moves his tent outside, until he moves right, Lemaisa again, he lives in Machane Levia. So what do you see from here? That not only someone who's Tamei Meis could come into Machane Levia, but even what? Even the Meis himself could come into Machane Levia. Ela Amar Abaye, Tvul Yom Shel Zav. The Rosh changes the gears over here to Tvul Yom Shel Zav Lav Kizav Dami. Rather, what you have to say is that what's a Tvul Yom? Tvul Yom is someone who has gone to the mikvah, but yet needs sunset, needs Her of Shemesh for his Torah to be complete. So you see from here that a Tvul Yom of a Zav is not like a Zav. V'afilu hachi kevan de mechusar kapara lo ayo. So I'll say, even if you want to say that the Tvul Yom of the Zav is not like a Zav, but Lamaisa, what you do see from here is that halacha Lamaisa, someone who is mechusar kapara. Rabbi say, what's mechusar kapara? That's someone who has to bring karbanos, but has not yet brought those karbanos. Ultimately, again, is not permitted to enter into the mikdash. I will say, if at the end of the day he's in Machane Levia, Amaika Karile Oel Moed. Then ultimately, again, why is that called Oel Moed? I will say, Machane Levia is one step removed from Oel Moed. The memra to tell us as follows: Ma Hasam Muchusar Kapara Lo Ayil. I will say, just as into Oel Moed, someone who is Muchusar Kapara has not yet brought his requisite karbanos, cannot enter in. So to again into Machane Levia, someone who is Muchusar Kapara, someone who is missing his requisite karbanos, cannot enter in as well. V'hasam minalan, and I will say, from there, where do we know that that's true? Machane Levia. The sanya tamei l'rabos tvul yom. So we'll say when it says tamei, he will be tamei, therefore cannot enter. That even refers to a tvul yom, right? Someone who's gone to the mikvah already, just waiting for Her of Shemesh. Od tum asobo, his tumah is still with him. L'rabos mechusar kapara, to teach us that even someone who has gone to the mikvah, and even someone who has had herav shemesh, but has not yet brought his karbanos, is still considered to be, we'll call it ritually lacking, and therefore cannot come into the Oel Moed. Incredible. Again, I will say, keep this piece on pause. We're going to see ultimately where this fits into the concluding rites. But here's what we know, right? Here's what I know. What do I know? That halacha l'maisa, I'll say, we'll just tell you, let me just one piece of halacha l'maisa in this. Heli passed in machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon in terms of the concluding rites of the Nazir. So remember again, I was saying now this is talking about taglachas betuma. So I just want to point out one of the interesting things we're going to see is that there is a very big difference between the concluding rites of a regular neder nazirus versus a Nazir who has to restart because of tumah. One of the most dramatic differences we're going to see is, remember, a Nazir who finishes his nazirus, which we're going to see in just a moment. Okay, let me just finish up this piece. Hey, on Mem Daled 44b, that Mishnah was talking about a Nazir who became Tameh, is doing his ritual rites for the Tumah in order to start again. Right? How do we pass in that case? Well, I'll say in that case we pass in again haircutting done on day number 7, right, of his purification. Karbanos on day number 8. What happens if halacha l'maisa he pushed off haircutting to day number 7? So the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Akiva, namely that karbanos could occur on the same day as haircutting. So that's the resolution of that sugya. Good, I will say, new Mishnah. This is really fascinating stuff. Taglachas hatara cases. So I'll say, so now we're transitioning. What is the process for a Nazir who just finished out his term normally? That's called taglachas betara. Taglachas means haircutting in a state of ritual purity, which I will say means a regular Nazir, right? The Nazir was a Nazir for however long it was, it doesn't make a difference. Now I will say he's come to the end of his neder nazirus. What is the process for the conclusion? So here it is. Taglachas hatara ketzad. What's the conclusion? Hayamevi gimel behema. So we'll say, so part 1, you bring 3 karbanos. Now we've already spoken about this. You bring 3 karbanos. We'll say, what do you bring? Chatos, ola, and shlamim. 3 karbanos. Now we'll say, I want to point out, this is also very important, which is one of the other distinctions between a Nazir b'tara versus a Nazir b'tumah. A Nazir b'tumah brings an asham. A Nazir b'tara does not bring an asham. So Nazir b'tara, chatos, ola, shlamim. V'shochet es hashlamim. And I will say, so the first order of business, he shechs the shlamim first, shechs the shlamim, and what? Umigaleach alehem. And I will say, after he shechs the shlamim, that's when he takes his haircut. Right? So even though there are 3 karbanos, shecht shlamim first, after you shecht shlamim, do your haircut. Div Rabbi Yehudah. Those words Rabbi Yehudah. Rabbi Elazar says no. Lo haya megaleach ela ala chatos. Rabbi Elazar says no, not true. You only take your haircut after the chatos. Shachatos kodemis b'chol makom. So we'll say fundamental machlokes Rabbi Yehudah about the order of the karbanos. Rabbi Yehudah is saying, so shlamim comes first, and then take your haircut after shlamim. Rabbi Elazar is saying chatos comes first, take your haircut after chatos. And why Rabbi Elazar says? Because whenever there is a chatos, chatos always comes first. Chatos always comes first. Ve'im gilach achas mishlashtan yatsa. I will say, but everyone agrees that no matter what order you did the karbanos in, as long as you did a karban and did your haircut afterwards, ultimately you're good to go. Right? So b'diavad, if you did your haircut after any one of the karbanos, you're good. Fine. Rabbi Shmuel says, Hevi gil behemos lo pireish. So also listen to this. What happens? I will say now normally, when you bring a karban, I will say, what do you have to do? When you bring a karban, you have to articulate what this particular animal is for. Let's say you rolled into the Beis HaMikdash at the end of your neder nazirus with your 3 karbanos, right? Your chatos, your ola, and your asham. And you did not specify which animal is for which. So ultimately, Shmuel says, no problem. Haruya lechatos, take off lechatos. the animal that is fit for a chattas is offered up as a chattas, the ola tikrav ola, an ola for an ola, l'shlamim tikrav shlamim. So I will say, why does this work if you normally have to articulate? I will say, if you take a quick look at the Rush, it's actually fascinating Rush. So I will say, if you see in Tosfos, where it says Rabbi Eliezer, at least this is how it is on my pagination, hopefully you have the same, where it says Rabbi Eliezer, right across from there, the Rush says, Velo Piresh, Afal Gav Dechala Karbanos, Sarach Sheikra Lehem Abaylim Shem. Even though normally you have to articulate an identity for each karban, hachalot tzarech ela achar shamra ela nizirusi harikilu kara lechol echad. So lechol echad ve'echad. So we'll say, now listen to this. As long as you said these three animals are for my nazirus, you're good to go. Now we'll say, now why is that? We actually learned this before. Why is that? The kisba eina ru'uya ela lechatos. Because I will say again, the female sheep could only be used for a chatos. The keves, the male sheep, la'olah, and ayil and the ram for shlam. In other words, I will say, what do you have going for you in this case over here? You have three dissimilar animals. And each of these animals could only be used for a particular type of karban. Right? So ultimately, again, the female sheep could only be used for the female sheep can't be used for a chatos, right? The keves can only be used for an olah, and the ayil can only be used for a shlamim. So therefore, because each of these animals could only be used for a specific type of karban, therefore, again, even if you did not specify which animal is for which, you're good to go. Because each of the animals can only be used for a specific type of karban. Now, what you do need to say, what do you need to articulate? That these are for my Naziros. So as long as you say these are for my Naziros, then ultimately the ram is going to be for shlamim, right? The keves is going to be for olah, and the kispa is going to be for the chatos. Good, beautiful. So we'll say that's the Mishnah. Tan Rabbanan, the gilach hanazir pesach olam moed. So we'll say, now watch this. Remember the fundamental machlokes we had over here was between Rabbi Yehudah and Rabbi Nazir, right? So Rabbi Yehudah says that halacha l'maisa, you shecht the shlamim first and then take your haircut afterwards. Rabbi Nazir says no, you shecht the chatos first and then take your haircut afterwards. So here we go. Tarabanan, v'gilach hanazir pesach ol hamoed. The Nazir will literally take his haircut at the entranceway of Ol HaMoed, to which the Gemara says b'shlamim hakasa medaber. And I will say, the pasuk is describing over here the process of the shlamim. When the pasuk says that the Nazir is going to take his haircut opposite the Ol HaMoed, what it's referring to over here is the shechting of the shlamim. Shneimar, v'shachtu pesach Ol HaMoed, atom, b'shabbat say that's shlamim. So the Gemara says, atom b'shlamim hakasa medaber, ein el pesach Ol HaMoed mamish. How do you know it's about shlamim? Maybe the pasuk is literally just saying he cuts his hair opposite the entrance of the Beis Hamikdash. How do you know it's referring to shlamim? To which the Gemara says, "Oh, in ela Pesach ol hamoed mamish amrit imkein derech bizayonu." I will say, for the Nazir just to sit there taking a haircut opposite the entrance of the Beis Hamikdash sounds very degrading to the sanctity of the Beis Hamikdash. Right, the Beis Hamikdash is not a barbershop. Right, he's just sitting there taking his haircut. Rather, it must mean that he's offering up the shlamim, and after he offers up the shlamim, that's the time in which he takes his haircut. To which the Gemara Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Eno tzarech. So let's listen to this. Hare Amra Torah, the Torah says, Lo sale b'malos al mizbechi. They will say, we know that halacha l'maisa, the Torah tells us that you have to have a ramp by the mizbeach, by the altar, and you can't have steps. They will say, why can't you have steps? Because modesty. So we'll say, if you can't have steps by the altar because of modesty, then Allah has kama v'kama, you cannot turn the Beis Hamikdash into a barbershop, right, and start having people taking haircuts opposite the entrance of the Beis Hamikdash. So we'll say, Nusach achar b'medrash, so we'll say there's another version over here, b'medrash parshas naso, v'gilach hanazir, Rabbi Yoshua says, b'shlam ha'kasam medaber. So we'll say, when the pasuk says, v'gilach hanazir pesach ol hamoed, the Gemara is suggesting over here that actually means the shechting of the carbon shlamim. Oh, Eino Ella, maybe it refers to hair cutting. Im kach amar Torah lo saleh kavchomer ledavar shlo yigaleach Pesach o Amoid ela b'shlag chaz v'davar. So we'll say it's saying the same thing. It's actually interesting. It's a quotation from the Medrash that somehow made it into the Gemara, which is very interesting. Yitzchak Omer enot tzarech harei Omer v'lakach eser rosh nizro v'nasan el ha'esh. So also Yitzchak says. So the pasuk says he will take the hair of his nazirus and he will put it under the fire. We'll say we're going to talk about this next. Actually, something very interesting. We're going to see that as you're cooking the shlamim, which you do again in the lishkas Nazir, we'll talk about this. The Nazir cuts his hair. What does he do with his hair? He burns it in the fire underneath the carbon. We're going to talk about this. So the pasuk says he'll take his hair of his nazirs, v'nasan al ha'esh, he'll put it on the fire. This is a person, someone who's only missing lekicha, the taking of the hair, and ultimately the placement of the hair in the fire. Comes to exclude someone who says missing the bringing of the hair as well. Others say also an alternate version of this. I'm sorry. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, Rabbi Yitzchak says also that the pasuk of V'gilach hanazir Pesach al Amoid is talking about the actual shechting of the shlamim. To which the Gemara says, so b'shlamachas v'dar o eina el Pesach al Amoid mamish, means no, that mamish, go ahead and take your haircut. The opposite, the entry of the Beis HaMikdash. Tamulamar v'lakach eser rosh nizro. Makom shumevashel sham haya megaleach. So also the pasuk says he will take the hair of his naziros and he will throw it in the fire underneath the carbon that he is cooking. Rabbi say, what do we learn from here? In the place that he is cooking, that is where you do the hair cutting. Rabbi say, so let me just pause here for just a second. Let me give you coming attractions. The Azara, right? Rabbi say, we know if we take our visual, right? If we imagine walking into the Beis HaMikdash, how we should be zocha b'karov. I would say, walk into the Beis HaMikdash. What did you walk into? You walked into the Azara, the courtyard. In the courtyard, there are 4 major chambers, right? One in each of the corners. In one of the corners, the southeast corner we're going to see, there was called the Lishkas HaNazirim. That was the chamber of the Nazirim. I will say, what happened in Lishkas HaNazirim? We're going to see. That's where they did their hair cutting, and that's where they cooked the shlamim. So the idea over here is hair cutting was done in the Beis HaMikdash compound, but it was not done opposite the entryway into the Mikdash proper. That would have been something degrading, right? That would have been something inappropriate. Good. Again, we'll see this crystallized in the Rambam. What does he mean? So we'll say that's why when the Torah says V'gilach HaKohen V'gilach HaNazir Pesach Al Hamoed, which literally sounds like the Nazir is taking his haircut opposite the entranceway into the Beis HaMikdash, the Gemara is understanding that refers to the offering of the carbon shlamim, not to the actual haircut. So the Gemara says V'gilach HaNazir Pesach Al Hamoed Kozman Shem Pesach Al Hamoed Pasuach Inu Megaleach. There's another very interesting halacha which comes to us, which is, when can the Nazir do his hair cutting? When the doors of the Beis HaMikdash are open. Rabbi say, remember again, the Beis HaMikdash doors were not always open. They were Mishnah Maseches Yuma. They were opened up Barakai, right? They were opened up at dawn. And they were closed again at sunset. Right, nightfall. Right. So Lamaisa again, what does it mean when it says that the Nazir will do his haircut Pesach o Amoid? It means that the hours, so to speak, for the Nazir's haircut are when the doors of the Beis HaMikdash themselves are open. Shimon Shazuri Omer V'gilach HaNazir Pesach o Amoid V'lo Nazira. Fascinating. If I say further on, another interesting halacha. What does it mean when it says that the Nazir will cut his hair at the entrance of the o Amoid? I will say what that means is the Nazir's haircut is done in the Azara, done in the courtyard, but not the Nazira. Right? A woman who becomes a Nazira, her hair cutting is not done in the courtyard. Why not? Rabbi say on the base, Shema Yiskare Ba Pirchei Kuhuna. Rabbi say literally translated because maybe the young Kohanim will become aroused by her. And I will say, now obviously, in order to go ahead and cut the Nazirah's hair, what do you have to do? You have to uncover her hair. You have to uncover her hair. So the notion of uncovering her hair in public, ultimately, again, could be something that could be a breach in modesty. So that's very interesting. So what the Gemara is suggesting over here is a Nazirah, where does she have her hair cutting done? Somewhere else. Not in the Beis HaMikdash. Not in the Beis HaMikdash. Right? She goes to a barber, she goes somewhere else, but Lamaisa, not in the public setting. Only the Nazir does his hair cutting in the public setting, not the Nazirah. So also, I just want to point out, so just before we go on, so we have, well, actually, let's finish. So Mara said, Shema Yizkar Bercha Yehudah. Amar lo, he said to him, 1 second, Lidvarecha, Sota Tochiach. But 1 second, I will say, we have examples of women uncovering their hair in public. And we're not worried about ultimately, again, the Pirchei Kuna becoming aroused. But we'll say Pirchei Kuna are the young Kohanim. They say the young Kohanim are around the Beis HaMikdash. D'chsiv ba ve'amidu lifnei Hashem. Because the pasuk is by Sota. Also remember again, Sota is the one suspected of adultery. Her entire process happens in the public sphere. Right? The pasuk says you will go ahead and literally bring her b'fnei Hashem. So her process takes place publicly in the Beis HaMikdash, and her hair is uncovered. Her hair is uncovered. Yet we're not worried about the Pirchei Kuna. Here's the big difference. Amar lahem, zu kochalas sepokesas, zu eno kechalas sepokesas. So I will say the whole chap of the sota, when the sota is brought in the Beis HaMikdash for a sota process, she is made to look unattractive. When a woman is finishing her neder nazir, so I'll say, but pokelas because it means she's wearing her makeup, she looks pretty. In other words, she's a regular woman. She's a regular woman who takes pride in her appearance. So therefore, when she comes to the Beis HaMikdash for her hair cutting, if she were to come to the Beis HaMikdash for her hair cutting, she's dressed up, she looks beautiful, she's wearing makeup, however a woman normally presents herself. So therefore, again, if you start uncovering and cutting her hair in the Beis HaMikdash, that could be a source of arousal for the Pirchei Kuna. The sota, the whole chap of sota, the whole essence of sota process is to make the woman unattractive. That's part of the process ultimately. So therefore, there's no chashash ultimately again of arousal of the Pirchei Kuna in those circumstances. Therefore, I will say what comes out over here. So we'll say, so what do we get from here? So we'll say, so number one, halacha l'maisa, the Nazir B'tara is bringing 3 karbanos, right? What are 3 karbanos? Chatos, shlamim, and ola. Chatos, shlamim, and ola. Which one is shechted first? Machlokes. Machlokes is between Rabbi Yehudah and Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Yehudah, it's shlamim, Rabbi Lazar, chatos. Here's what we agree on. What happens after the shechting of the first karban? Hair cutting. Hair cutting. Rabbi will say, where is hair cutting done? Where is hair cutting done? So the lashon of the pasuk is Pesach Oel Moed. But does it literally mean opposite the entry into the mikdash? No, because that would be degrading. That would be degrading. Rather, we will say we're going to see it's done in the Adar, it's done in the courtyard, but not actually opposite the entranceway to the Beis HaMikdash. We'll see what happens with the hair a little bit as well. Another drasha, over Gilach Nazir Pesach. What do we learn? It is Dafka a Nazir who gets his haircut in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. Who doesn't? Who doesn't? A Nazira. Right? Out of concerns for modesty, her haircut is done in a more public setting. Beautiful. Mishnah, what says great? It's great. This is great. Mishnah. Amud Beis, 45b, 4 lines down, Mishnah. So how you know, tell Searosh, so say, now we're this. It's always exciting to see Mishnayos like that are like, I will say, like in a sequential, procedural order. So that's literally what we're being taken. This is a journey. We're literally being taken through the process of Torah for the Nazir. So how you know, tell Searosh, say, so now he's cut his hair. When did he cut his? Let's go back. When did he cut his hair? When did he cut his hair? After what? After which karban? Right? So really, saying good. B'diavad, it's anyone. Machlokes, ideally, which should be first? Right? Should it be Rabbi Yehudah, the Shlamim, Rabbi Lazar, the Chatos? But the Mishnah already said b'diavad, as long as there was a karban that was offered, he can do his hair cutting. Fine. So now I'll say, cut his hair. Haynotel ser rosh niso. So now I'll say, now, what does the Nazir have? He has his hair. What does he do with his hair? Oh, bless you. Mishaleach tachas hadud. We'll say he throws it under the dud. Now, what's the dud? It's not your hot water heater. Right? So we'll say, so what's right? What's the dud? So we'll say the dud in this context ultimately again is the pot. Now remember again, we'll say out of the chatos, the ola, and the shlamim. So remember again, chatos, kohen. Ola, mizbeach, shlamim is the one carbon that the owner gets a chelek of. So we'll say, now what's happening over here? Where is the Nazir preparing his? So now the Nazir gets meat, right? He gets meat for the shlamim. Where is the Nazir preparing his meat? Again, in the Azara, in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, in what we call the Lishkas HaNazirim, right? In that chamber in the courtyard. So we'll say, now what does he do with his hair? See, he's cooking up some shlamim, right? So we'll say, so now what happens? There's a pot. There's a fire underneath the pot. He takes his hair, Nazirite hair, and he throws it into the fire underneath the pot in which he is cooking the shlamim. Incredible. But I will say, now this is all presupposing that where is the Nazir taking his haircut? In the Azara, in the court of the Beis HaMikdash. If he took his haircut outside of the Nazir, we'll say Medina just means outside of the Beis HaMikdash. If he took his haircut somewhere else, then what? Then he would not go ahead and put his hair in the fire underneath the pot cooking the carbon. When is this so? Furthermore, say, when do we say that you throw your hair in the fire underneath the pot cooking the carbon? That's only Rabbi say with what we'll call a haircut impurity. In other words, we're talking about the hair cutting at the normal conclusion of your nazirus. Rabbi say when it comes to taglachas hatuma, which means what? The Nazir became tameh, and once again, when Nazir comes tameh, what does he have to do? He also has to cut his hair. That hair was not thrown into the fire underneath our karbanos. Lo hayimeshleach tachas hadud. That would not be thrown into the fire underneath the carbon. Rabbi Meir says, no, not true. Hakol mishalchin tachas hadud. Rabbi Meir says, in general, whenever the Nazir takes a haircut, he always throws the hair in the fire underneath the pot cooking the carbon. Chutz min atami shebemedina bilvad. Was with one exception. Rabbi Meir says the only exception will be if a Nazir tameh is doing his haircut outside of the Beis HaMikdash, that hair wouldn't get thrown in. Okay, so I will say, let's go with what we know. What's definitive from the Mishnah is, if you are a regular Nazir who finished your Ned and Nazirus, cutting your hair in the Beis HaMikdash, right? I will say, what do you do with the hair? What do you do with it? You throw it into the fire underneath the pot in which you're cooking the shelaima. Okay? Everything else sounds like it's subject to machlokas, right? What happens if you didn't do your hair cutting in the Beis HaMikdash, you did it outside the Beis HaMikdash, do you burn the hair? That's a machlokas. What about if you're a Nazir tameh, cut your hair, tumah, do you throw it into the fire? Machlokas. Okay, let's go. Says the Gemara. It's really fascinating. Notel se'er nizro. So what's that? Notel se'er rosh nizro. Tana Rabbanan. V'achar kach notel asharotav v'nosein al se'er rosh nizro. U'mishaleach tachas dud shel shlamim. Wow. So we'll say there's another piece. What's the other piece? So I'll say there's one more piece that Mishnah didn't mention. So I'll say, so now what happens? Again, let's just place our Nazir. So where is our Nazir? Our Nazir is standing in the Lishkas HaNazirim, which is in the southeast corner of the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. What is he doing in that corner? So we'll say he has cut his hair, right? He's already cut his hair. He's cooking up his shlamim. He's cooking up, right? The shlamim is offered up on the Mizbeach. He gets his part. He's cooking up his part of Lishkas HaNazirim. Now, what did the Mishnah tell me? What did the Mishnah tell me? He takes his hair, he throws the hair into the fire underneath the pot of shlamim meat that he's cooking. Now the Gemara adds in, by the way, one more piece. He takes some shlamim gravy, puts it on the hair before he puts the hair in the fire. Shlamim gravy, right? Shlamim gravy on the hair, puts that on the right. So notal sarotav. So while he's holding the hair, he puts some shlamim gravy on that hair, right? And ultimately, then he goes ahead and puts that in the fire underneath the shlamim. Then I will say, by the way, the Gemara says it just parenthetically, if you were to throw the hair underneath another carbonic pot, in other words, let's say the Kohanim are cooking up their chatos meat, and the Nazir were to go ahead and throw his hair underneath the chatos meat, right? Then that would be fine as well. Or asham, if they were offering up their asham, to which the Gemara says, asham, but Nazir tell me, well, asham, where does asham come from? I'll say, there's no asham over here. There's no asham, right? Also remember again, asham, right? By Nazir B'tara, there's only what? A chatas and an ola and a shlam. There's no asham. To which the Gemara says, Asham ben Nazir tar mi'ika. Amarav is what it means to say, Im Nazir tameh, mishrak tachas hadud shal Asham yatsa. Also, what it's talking about as a Nazir tameh. Also, remember again, by a Nazir tameh, what does a Nazir tameh bring? So we'll say ultimately again, a Nazir tameh brings an asham of two birds as ashamos. One ultimately offered up as a chatos, one offered up as an olah. So if by a Nazir tameh he cut his hair and he threw it underneath the asham fire, that would be acceptable as well. To which the Gemara says, "Minahani mili." They both say, now this is very interesting because what have we just been introduced to? What have we been introduced to? We have just been introduced to gravy. To gravy. That is really, I was like, this is one of those things. Sometimes you ever have like a moment where like you think to yourself, if somebody just walked in, like for the first time and never learned anything in their life, right, and just sat down and heard this, they'd be like, what is this? This is one of those moments, right? So I would say, the Gemara just said to us, so what happens over here? The Nazir takes his hair, his shorn hair, is that the right word? Right? His shorn hair, and what does he do? He pours a little shlamim gravy on it, and he puts it underneath the fire. The Gemara says, Benahani mili. Whoa, where did that come from? Right, first of all, I want to point out the Mishnah made no mention of gravy. Right, so where did this come from? Amarava, Amakra, Asher Tachas Zevach Hashlamim. Shabbos said, this is actually fascinating. This drasha, the pasuk says that ultimately, again, the Nazir will cut his hair. The Nasan al ha'eish Asher Tachas Zevach Hashlamim. He will put it on the fire. Talking about his hair, put it on the fire that is underneath the shlamim. So the Gemara darshans, mizivcho te tachtav. Part of the carbon should also be under the carbon. Mitachas zevach, asher tachas zevach hashlamim. That even the shlamim should be under the shlamim. We'll say now, how is the shlamim under the shlamim? How could that happen? If what? You take a little bit of gravy, you put it on the hair, so that's something amazing happens. Not only is the hair under the shlamim, but what? The shlamim's underneath the shlamim as well. Incredible. But we just said that if you burn the hair underneath the pot of chatas, you're also yotzei. So the Gemara says, "My taima, Omikra, zevach l'rabos hasachatas va'asham." Pasuk says zevach, right? In other words, you'll burn it under the zevach. That comes to include chatas and asham as well. So the idea is, you just ideally have to burn the hair underneath the fire that's being used to cook a carbon. Now, also remember, again, I just want to point out, if you're not a Kohen, you're not eating chatas and you're not eating asham, right? Only Kohanim can eat that. So in the shlamim, the Nazir is burning the hair underneath the fire, or in the fire that is cooking the portions of the carbon that the Nazir, is going to eat. And that's where he's going to apply gravy. In the other cases, you could burn it underneath a quote-unquote sacrificial fire, but that's being used to prepare meat for Kohanic consumption, not for Yisrael consumption. So the Gemara says as follows: V'ha afikse lahai zevach merota. But 1 second. But also, you already used the word zevach to teach us that you have to apply gravy to the hair. Im kein limakra merotov hashlamim. The pasuk could have said rotov, my zevach. Rabbi say, what does zevach teach me? Shmamina l'rabos chatas v'asham. So we'll say, the word zevach actually comes to teach me two things. Number one, zevach teaches me that I apply some shlamim gravy to the hair before I go ahead and burn it. And number two, it also teaches me what? That even if you don't burn it in the fire underneath the shlamim, if you burn it underneath the fire of the chatas and the asham, that is fine as well. Maybe the pasuk of zevach comes to teach me that it's only in the fire of the chatas and the asham that you burn the hair. Imkein lema shlamim v'zevach. My zevach hashlamim. So I'll say that it should have said shlamim v'zevach. Why does it say zevach hashlamim? Shma mina tarti. Ultimately learn both points, like we just said before. Tana banon. Hakol hayu mishalkin tachas hadud. Chutz mitame shegilach v'medina. So we'll say, now listen to this. Every Nazir burns his hair underneath the fire. Now we'll say, when we say every Nazir, so remember again, every Nazir, there are a couple of different models over here, right? Let's say for a Nazir b'tara, a regular Nazir who just finished out his Nazirus. What are the two models we'll say? Model number one is he's taking his haircut in the Beis HaMikdash. Model number two is he's taking his haircut outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Braisa now says, Hakol mishalchem tachas hadud. Everyone burns their hair underneath the fire of the shlamim in the lishkas hanazirim in the Beis Hamikdash, with one exception. Chutz mitame shegilach b'medina. With one exception, a Nazir Tameh who did his haircut outside of the Beis Hamikdash. That's the only guy who does not go ahead and burn his hair underneath on the fire, in the carbonic fire. Why? Mipnei shesaro nikbar de Rabbi Meir. Both is very interesting, because Rabbi Meir holds that a Nazir Tameh who did his haircut outside of the Beis Hamikdash, his hair is buried. His hair is buried. Rabbi Yehudah says no. Torim Kahn v'Kahn hayu mishalchin. Tmeim Kahn v'Kahn lo hayu mishalchin. Rabbi Yehudah says not true. Rabbi Yehudah says Tohorim, if you're a Nazir tar, so if you're a Nazir tar, we'll say again, remember, what is a Nazir tar? What is a Nazir tar? Just a regular Nazir finishes out his Neder Nazirus. If you are a Nazir tahar, so ultimately again, whether you had your haircut in the Beis Hamikdash or outside of the Beis Hamikdash, you would send your hair in to be burned in the fire underneath the shlamim, or if not the shlamim, underneath the chatas and the asham as well. Right? However, Tmeim kan v'kan lo hayim mashach. Rabbi Yehudah says, if you're a Nazir Tameh, his hair is not burned in the mikdash. Instead, what happens with his hair? Buried outside of the mikdash. Buried outside of the mikdash. The Chum say, Hakol lo hayim mashalchin tachas adud. Chum say no. In general, there's only one case of where hair is burned underneath the fire in the Beis Hamikdash. We'll say, what's the one case? Right? Tar sheba mikdash mipnei shenasa kimitzvaso. The Chachamim say there's only one case, ultimately again, of hair that's burned in the mikdash. And we'll say, what case is that? That's the Nazir Tahar, ultimately again, who's cutting his hair in the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because that guy is doing what he's supposed to be doing. Every other case, ultimately again, halacha l'maisa, would go ahead and be buried outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so I'll say, we have 1 minute. We have 1 minute. So let me begin. So I'll say, so that is actually very interesting. Now, I do want to point out, this is not the end of the process, but in terms of what do we have up until this point. So I'll say, let me begin just to share with you. Actually, no, let me begin to share with you this idea. So the Rambam writes as follows. He says, actually, you know what I'm going to do? We'll stop over here for today. Meretz Hashem, we're going to pick up, so we give people 2 minutes to put on their tefillin. And Meretz Hashem, we'll start over here today. I just want to point out, these are very exciting sugyas, we'll say, because by the time we get to the end of the parak, which is Shabbos in Meretz Hashem, we will have a completely well-rounded view of the entire process of the Torah of the Nazir, both for the Nazir Tar as well for the Nazir Tameh. We'll say, Shkoyach.